about this right now. I mean, over just the last decade, worker cooperatives have tripled in this city. I mean, think about that. That's like some really incredible growth for an idea that's been around for a very long time, right? And so, like, what is underpinning the current enthusiasm around worker cooperatives, right? I think the landscape that Rick lays out explains a lot about it, right? That, I mean, especially something you didn't mention directly, but like the 2008 crisis, right? And 30 years of entrenched and growing inequality, right? Have both led people to ask what alternatives are out there, right? And increasingly, worker ownership is a means of combating that inequality, because it does precisely what Rick suggests, right? It gives people the power over the decisions that govern their lives, right? Their daily lives, in spaces where they spend most of their time, right? And being able to just decide on your schedule. I mean, you know, we like to talk a lot about wages, right? But just being able to organize when and how you work is such an empowering concept, right? That I think we sometimes neglect to think about like the workday as like a field of struggle, right? Like an arena in which a lot can be accomplished. And this is the case, especially for a lot of precarious workers, right? Most of our membership are women in New York City. So this growth has been led mainly by women, mainly people of color, mainly immigrants and Spanish speakers, right? Or non-native English speakers. So, I mean, this is a really different face of the cooperative movement than the cooperatives that one associates with the other big rise of cooperativism in the United States, which was around the 70s, right? 60s and 70s. So what, right? Some of the questions that like I present openly, right? What is driving that that growth, and why is it like that these most impacted communities from inequality and structural oppression are the ones that on the forefront of transformation, right? And I think that's something really important to point out. The other thing is that, look, you know, we've had over a few hundred years of regulatory regimes, right, and legal statutes and judicial decisions to protect the interest of traditional capitalist business, right? And so there is a lot that needs to be dismantled, right, or improved in order to help protect and spear the growth of cooperatives in this country. And that's a place that we all can get involved, right? This isn't just, so yeah, it's a great time to start your own business if you want to get into that nitty gritty, right? If you want to structure your workplace democratically, if you want to convert it into a worker co-op, let's talk after this event and we'll get into all of it, because right now in New York City is one of the best places to do that, and I'll explain why in a few minutes. But on top of that, there's this whole arena of political struggle, right, that everybody can get involved with, in the advocacy, right, of making worker ownership a more accessible thing for all people, right? And so, I mean, think about it. It's been a few hundred years, right, in which capitalism and traditional capitalist businesses have influenced the political process, right? And I mean, you go to Albany today, and you see that, like, Albany, the state government doles out money to private enterprise today without any, like, you ask yourself, well, where are all the free market fundamentalists, like, complaining about, like, socialism of private enterprise? I mean, they're throwing money at developments for like huge corporations, right? And nobody complains, right? If Albany just gave like a quarter of that towards worker ownership, I mean, you would see quadruple the numbers of worker co-ops today, right? So that's an arena of activism that anybody, right, not just worker owners, can get involved in. The other side is, as Alan mentioned, I mean, where we buy our things. Like, thanks to the efforts of, so CNIC is different from NICNOC. CNIC is the Cross-Sectoral Cooperative Economics Alliance. So they're looking at more things than worker co-ops. They're looking at food co-ops, as the gentleman over here was talking about, right? They community gardens, housing co-ops, et cetera, right? But it's amazing when you finally have it all laid out to you, right? That like in New York City, there's already a vibrant solidarity economy underfoot. It's just that for a lot of us, we can't perceive it, right? And so one of the ways, clearest ways in which we can get involved, right, is by supporting cooperative and solidarity economy projects all across the city through our dollars, through our consumer dollars, but also through our collaboration and in partnerships, right? So another example of that, New York City has, as you say, one of the largest worker co-ops in the country, CHCA, Cooperative Home Care Associates, that started around the 1980s and today has grown to over 2,200 employees, mainly women. But besides that, we have a growing sector in cleaning cooperatives, right? So these are usually immigrant women who have been, generally taken advantage of in the informal economy, but also in the by agencies, right? And who have decided to own their means of production, right? To own their companies, and they have come together through this amazing project called Up and Go, which is a platform similar to like Yelp or Seamless, where you can hire their services online, right? And they own the platform as well. So this is really different from like the so-called sharing economy, right? Which the Yelps and the Ubers and Airbnbs of the world, in which, yeah, it's a great way of bringing markets, customers to underutilized assets and workers, etc. But where the workers are completely blocked out of any kind of ownership or access to the profits that platform creates, the value that platform creates. So this is another really interesting effort. It's called Up and Go, which you should all kind of look at and consider supporting. And then obviously, transforming your own workforce. So, and I'll end on this note. The idea of worker ownership is something that can be imported and utilized anywhere, right? And what I mean by that is, even though you don't have places where you work might not have the articles of incorporation that allow for collective decision making to happen, there are already little experiments that can happen within your workplaces, right? In which you can start to play around with these tools of collective decision making, of democratizing things, inspiring autonomy in the workplace, et cetera, et cetera. That there's a lot of resources out there. The Democracy at Work Institute, which often gets confused with Democracy at Work, but they have an amazing resource library around governance practices, conflict resolution, democratizing workplaces that show case studies of places that have begun, right, by changing the way they make decisions, and then after figuring that works, taking the extra step of legally incorporating, right, and making those agreements legally binding. So those are other ways in which I think the spirit, the virus of worker ownership is starting to propagate well beyond worker co-ops as we traditionally understand it. So I all encourage you to check out NICNOC, check out how to get involved. Obviously, Democracy at Work has been doing a lot of great work around advocacy and education, so support them. And next week, actually just across the road, the Eastern Conference Workplace Democracy, which this is why I'm completely exhausted and kind of wandering in my remarks, is we're holding the largest worker democratic workplace conference in US. Here in New York City, we'll be hosting next week at Fordham Law. You're all invited to come. So Eastern Conference for Workplace Democracy, please check it out as well. Thank you.
One of the most exciting things for some of us who are educators is that Mondragon not only is a successful business that involves over 100,000 people, but they created their own school system. And that school system is bringing up a next generation on a whole different vision of the world and cooperation and possibility. The kind of thing that we could only dream about having in New York. And it passed without the kind of recognition in the public that it needed to have. But when CUNY opened the Murphy Institute, and the Murphy Institute hired Rebecca Lurie to be the point person for this issue inside of the intellect of the City University and the intellect of the education network in New York City, it changed the whole ballgame. So Rebecca Lurie.
Wow, thanks, Alan.
You're welcome.
So I'm honored to be here and to be able to sort of feed off of my colleagues on either side. Let me get a sense of the audience and ask you a few questions. How many people here have made decisions in meetings with groups of other people? Right. And how many people here have felt good about that experience? Okay. So I had a list of questions, but that was sort of the punchline. There's, as we've tried to figure out, so my background is also, well, originally a union carpenter, so I sort of have mixed interest in that Hudson rail yards because my pension does well when we have union construction, and yet we should occupy it and we need those houses. But since then I went on to teaching, and by way of teaching carpentry, I went on to teaching all kinds of people to teach their industry to other people. And I've gotten very involved with the worker co-op movement. Actually, originally, it's worth noting, that's how I became a carpenter. There was a worker-owned co-op up outside of New Paltz that was renovating their space in the late 70s to expand their delivery of food, and they needed a larger warehouse. And they put their contract out to bid as a worker-owned co-op. They decided in one of those meetings, when they were going to spend all this money to renovate, they said, let's make sure a woman or a minority gets trained on this job. So it doesn't just happen, but it has impact. And believe me, it fucking had impact. I went on to be a union carpenter, and I went on to do a lot of things, but I really, when I looked back at what made me become a carpenter, which was sort of an obscure thing for me in 1979, flailing as a hippie graduating from college, not knowing how or where to get a job. It was a co-op that had the awareness to think outside of the box of their business to the broader community. So I reference back that story to get me to where I am now, which is when we were looking at how can we help NICNOC and the co-ops in New York expand, and how can we do this within the Murphy Institute. I listened to some things I was hearing, and one of the things I heard, particularly, so if people don't know the Murphy Institute, it's a school, we're actually becoming a school within CUNY within the year, so we will be, and we currently are an institute, we will be a school for labor and urban affairs. So when I brought the idea of let's explore co-ops here, I had some people say to me within the labor movement, how many people here come out of the labor movement? Got a few union members? Okay. I had some people say to me, we don't do business here. Like, because they heard co-ops and they thought that meant we had to study business. We probably do need to study business. We need to understand how financial projections work. We need to understand the books, because we were leaving it up to those guys elsewhere. Or it was, and they were telling us what to do. So I was told by some very forward-thinking, progressive leftists, we don't do business here. And I heard that, and I'm like, well, what does that mean we don't do business here? What do we do? Well, we do social change. So when I tried to understand what that means in relationship to the co-ops, I started cultivating this concept with other people, and it was bubbling up actually all over the globe, not at all just in New York. And I'll cut to the chase and then back up to it again. we believe that there are actually three components that will make an individual co-op effective, but the cooperative movement that Rick so well talks about what it needs to be. Three things, three competencies that we all need to cultivate for this to happen. We need to understand how to work with each other. Those meetings that are effective, when people understand how to read the books because somebody next to them teaches them that and they say, aha, or someone else says, I really need to be home by 3 o'clock, and someone else says, I can cover for you, and a decision is made, that's empowering. That's self-actualization at work. That's working together. And I'm gonna use this icon for you of a heart. When we work together and we build community and we have compassion and we do it in a way that's a team, that's one set of competencies. When I was visited Zuccotti Park back when it was occupied, there was a handmade sign on a pizza box that said, compassion is our new currency. And I took a picture of it, and it's one of my memes, because I really do think that compassion needs to be the new currency. And I liked the term sharing economy when I first heard it until I understood it was already being co-opted. But compassion, let's bring that to the fore. The second competency is how to run things. It's how to read the books, and it's also how to distribute labor and how to assign jobs. And if I'm better at cutting a miter joint and somebody else is better at hanging sheetrock, then let's, do what we're better at, because we have to be effective and efficient. But also, if I can learn the other thing, how do we teach it? All these things are the operations typically taught in MBA. Operations, how do you run the business? How do you manage people to run the business efficiently? And those are needed in a business. So the second set of competencies that I talk about, and the icon I use is the hand, or two hands, or a team. And how do we figure out how to do it? Some people might have used the money symbol in that competency, but I actually stepped away from that because I think money limits what we mean when we talk about an economy. We mean sharing and figuring out how to get things done. So that second competency is how do we operate the business and its finances and it's the things we make. And the third competency, and this is what's really important for this group, the third competency is understanding the political economy we sit within. So when I was told at the Murphy Institute, and someone said we don't do business around here, because what they really thought we do around here is we're involved in the political economy, we're changing the world. So I'm arguing that it's that end, it's these other things. And if we have co-ops who don't pay attention to the political economy, they can be co-opted into just being another business where a few people run it. But if they understand that you're working within this larger space that's about social change, and that social change happens in all those levels, and those three spaces I spoke about, the heart of the people, the hands of the people, and how we relate to Albany or each other or our network of, if we're one co-op of cleaners and we're another co-op of cleaners and we all come together, we suddenly have a business association, and oh my God, a business association can lobby for things like, by the way, when the building trades were able to lobby for Hudson Yards to change its zoning, look what we got in Hudson Yards. So if we could think in those ways of a political economy, working together as a team, and also running the operations and understanding all those things are needed, then we can start to take to scale. And I say this because also we have that knowledge already. It's just been isolated and alienated. So when I asked the question, how many people have worked together in teams, and all the hands went up, that really says we have some things to draw on. And our society has taught us that there are experts and there are people who don't know anything, and most of you don't know anything, but actually we all know plenty from our experience. So when we allow those known things to come to the fore, one of the reasons I think that the co-op movement is represented so strongly in the demographic that Pablo explained, women of color, and when we look around the globe, really the global south is very strong in this. It's because people are cultivating what they know and what they have, and what they have is this deep humanity. And so what we really want to bring forward is this deep humanity in a structure that fits into an economy that has otherwise been squashed thanks to the rise of capitalism and everything in its making. So there's last night I was watching the news, and I think it was Amy Goodman, but it was they were interviewing some people after the march down on downtown after Trump did this thing with the pulling out of the Paris Accords. And somebody was saying, you know, we really have to thank him because look what he's brought together. He's brought together this movement. I have, you know, so many of us are out on the street so much. And I think we need to understand that there is a response that we absolutely can be cultivating, which is why I think Alan opened up, what are we for, not what are we against. We're already cultivating that. And understanding how we are each doing that in our different places, in line with building a cooperativism, really matters. So participatory budgeting, that's another way that people are getting involved. How many people are now showing up at PTAs or town hall meetings? These are all part of cultivating this collective new approach. There's the notion of doing it with compassion, I think, is what's very important, because one of the things, so I feel I got permission to speak on this topic. The question of culture was raised last night in the room that, when we were talking about Bromsky, and you and a few others were speaking about culture, and the need for culture. And when I first, long ago, heard about culture in the workplace, I sort of thought that meant whether or not we celebrate people's birthdays. But later I understood, actually, as I started, I realized I didn't like that answer I gave myself. I had to really understand what we mean by culture. And the culture I want to summarize like this is, going back to that pizza box meme, it's a culture of compassion, it's a culture of understanding. And there's a shift happening on the planet. Dare I say, amongst a room of leftists in New York, I will say this, we're entering the age of Aquarius. And people in the global south, indigenous people, there's prophecies all over the planet from different indigenous cultures about this time that we're entering. And this time is one of cooperation. So in some ways, if we realize we're moving forward to a time that's been prophesized, and we need to cultivate in every nook and cranny that prophecy to come forward faster and better, that's our work. That's our work. And it's our work in these enterprises, or it's the work in the classrooms, or it's the work on the streets. But it happens with this notion of compassion and understanding. So I coined this term recently when I was struggling with a lot of things of late around racism especially, but understanding so much. Betterism. We need to stamp out betterism. And betterism is really that we're always, one-upping each other or feeling put down by someone else who one-upped us. So whether somebody went to the better demonstration, got the better t-shirt, or taught the better class, or anything, it happens, it does institutionally look like racism and sexism and classism and ableism. It does look like that. That I can't walk into a building because I can't make those stairs is one aspect of I'm not as good as, because the architecture did not include me. But when we start to think that betterism created that, it's like looking that we're moving towards the age of Aquarius, we're moving towards an age of cooperativism, we're coming out of an age where there was this betterism. And as we come out of it, we have to start to cultivate that. So the last thing I'll say, and then you can open it up, because there's so much to talk about. With NCNOC and this New York City network of all kinds of people doing co-ops, at the Murphy Institute, we created a catalog this year on the resources for co-ops. And we've helped to see what people are teaching. So I don't know if you can see this from here, but we use the icons, the heart, the hand, and the globe, to look at what's already being taught. How do we cultivate what's already happening so that we can help teach people to fight betterism, to cooperate more, and that we're doing it in all these places. But when we start enterprises, and there will be more of that because the economy is forcing people to do it themselves, right? Everybody, we've got the largest part of the growth in the market is people being self-employed. So really co-ops can take that self-employment and say, we are doing that. How do we set up a legal entity with all these competencies and these qualities? We're moving towards that. We need to teach people how to do that. This little catalog begins to say we're already doing it. How do we do it more? And I would argue we're doing it in nooks and crannies everywhere. And if we keep these three things, that we've got to work with the heart, we've got to make sure we're running decent operations, and we've got to pay attention to that political economy where there's so much to fight against and fight for, then we're integrating those things towards this new world. So.
Thank you. Our premise for this panel was that we're not raising the question whether or not worker-owner co-ops are the future. This starts with a premise, and this is where democracy at work in New York and the other 18 centers that are developing around the country start with, is that capitalism is in a terminal stage. And that we really are on the cusp of a moment in history. And, you know, it sort of elevates all of us to something bigger than our own little lives. We really are, and the left has a real role in this transition. We've been floundering for an awful lot of time, and trying to figure out a route out of the harbor. But the reality is that there's a beachhead for all of this now, not just in New York City, but in many other places around the country. There are a number of workshops at the Left Forum that will present that to you. But our effort is to really sort of reinforce what you already know, that it really is a challenge to all of us who are fighting all these things. I mean, a lot of us were on the streets the other day around the Trump-Paris Accords, and a bunch of us were on the steps of City Hall the other day because the Board of Ed is red baiting a good principal in Park Slope for running a school that has socialism in its curriculum and really teaches kids to organize and take responsibility.
Anti-racist.
But the Daily News on June 1st, and then I'm going to open it up, had an article, and it just sort of slipped by. It was on one of the pages, and it was just a little thing. It says, State Senate Democrats in a move intended to boost job growth in New York will unveil legislation Thursday to promote the creation of employee-owned businesses, the Daily News has learned. The legislation will be accompanied by the release of a report showing employee-owned businesses have had a stronger record of job growth in recent years than their counterparts. The Daily News. And they're not printing and they're not covering this story because they woke up this morning and said this is a good thing. They're doing it because of folks who for the last 15 or 20 years have been pushing for the recognition of a growing movement to support this stuff and a way out. So with that, I just want to thank the three of them for their presentations. We're going to keep going, but we want to open it up to you all. Please, there are a couple of rules. Please limit your comments to sort of a comment and a question if you have to. And let's go. I'm going to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then we'll go from there.
My question is for Pablo, and it's because there is something that I know about you, because I know you outside of this room that I think should be made public in this room. And that is that you and everyone at ICNOC has worked incredibly hard to amplify the voices and struggles of women, of people of color, of queer folks, of trans folks, of people experiencing intersecting oppressions in organizing of the conference you're putting together and in your work with worker cooperatives. And I'm interested in hearing your perspective, because I don't think I've ever had this conversation with you, and I think it would be great in the room, of how co-ops serve to be the best vehicle for the economic development of these communities, and how co-ops serve to address intersecting oppressions in a way that other models cannot.
Yeah, go on. No, go
Thank you. It's interesting because like the point that Rebecca was making about like how the nitty-gritty stuff often doesn't get discussed, and that a lot of people enter co-op work as from an ideological perspective and not necessarily from a material perspective. And what's really interesting about working with immigrant co-ops, which is my closest experience, personal experience, has been that like they're coming at it from like a really like concrete, my wages are being stolen. I have no rights whatsoever within the legal framework of this country, right? They can't just go and protest at a government agency for fear of whatever, you know, of the perils involved. And so like this model, right, is actually one of the only models they have to acquire rights in their workplace, right? And so like that like that kind of falls out. Like most people think of co-ops, oh yeah, this is a transformative, systematic thing. But when you're a subject, right, that is kind of outside of any kind of legal status, right, as a citizen, and have the protections, quote unquote, that citizenship provides, you're completely at the forces of the de facto forces, right? And people take advantage of that systematically, right? And so I think it's really important to show that it's not a coincidence, right? That these are the groups that are leading this charge around worker ownership. So yeah, I mean it's just inspiring. And the other point that Rick was making earlier about like, well, co-ops aren't political, right? That there's been like generations of like politicizing cooperative work. And what I'm seeing is precisely the opposite, right? That like because this becomes a means of empowerment, right? Where people felt like they didn't have a voice, like that is contagious. That metastasizes into whole different areas of political involvement and leadership that is just inspiring. And like, I mean, that's why I can't dwell on like, oh, things are so crap and everything, the system is rigged and everything is wrong. I mean, I'm just like, through this work, I'm seeing every day, right? Like supposedly the most vulnerable are actually some of the strongest, most eloquent, most leaderful people I know. And so I take inspiration and learn from that every day.
Yeah, I would just like to amplify that one of the beauties of a strategy of worker co-ops is precisely the range of people it can draw to support it. We've just heard about immigrants, people without documentation, people at the worst end of abuses. But I, for example, can tell you equal stories of going to reasonably well-paid workers in a variety of places around the country whose enormous anxiety is that they've seen in their communities, think the Midwest, of all the companies that have left, have shut down plants and opened them in China or wherever else. For them, the idea of a worker, that they would have a worker co-op and that the workers there would decide where production is going to be undertaken, brings the exodus of jobs to a screeching halt. And they can begin to see, you want security of your job? You want to be able to plan your family, plan your life? Well, the worker co-op is the best chance you have not to be told one Friday afternoon that there's no point coming on Monday because this place is closing down, like the others you can pass on the way to work each day. So here's a movement that can talk to immigrant women at one end of the spectrum and give them an idea of what to do, and at the same time talk to vast other parts of the American working class. And that also brings together people who've had a hard time